Welcome to Leading Professionals. If you're a professional in a leadership role, or if you simply want to understand your work and your organisation better, then you've come to the right place. In this series, I explore the complicated, messy and surprisingly emotional challenges of leading professionals. And I set out to answer some of the most crucial questions that professionals are currently facing. This particular episode is essential listening if you're a professional who wants to become a leader or if you vote in your firm's leadership elections. Because today I'm talking to Michael Ensser. Now, Michael is chair of Egon Zehnder, a global leadership consulting firm, and they specialise in identifying, evaluating and selecting the most senior leaders for the world's most significant private and public sector organisations. So why does this firm of consultants choose to elect their senior leaders? And how do the elections actually work? In professional firms, what really goes on behind the scenes of their carefully staged-managed leadership contests? Now, when we think of leadership elections, we tend to focus on elections in political parties, Big P politics, featuring manifestos, campaign managers, candidates' debates, rival factions, backroom deals, leaks to the press, and bitter betrayals. Elections where mainstream candidates can be beaten by a maverick outsider who promises change. Now, all this can happen in professional organisations too. Particularly when there are deep-seated, unresolved issues within the firm, leadership elections can be traumatic for all involved. But sometimes leadership elections just become ritualistic affirmations of anointed successors. And I've experienced both traumatic and ritualistic elections in my work, researching and advising the leaders of professional organisations. And sometimes I'm brought in to advise on designing an election process. Sometimes I'm called in after an election has occurred, when something's gone wrong. And sometimes the leaders just realise it's time for a governance refresh and turn to me for advice. So I've known leaders who thought the election was in the bag and came across as too complacent, so lost out to a challenger candidate. I've known leaders who were elected unopposed but were then unable to lead because they lacked a meaningful mandate from their colleagues. And I've known incumbent leaders who stood for re-election and were horrified and frankly hurt when a large slate of challengers stood against them. In one firm I've worked with, an incumbent chair failed to obtain the necessary votes, even though he was the only candidate. His colleagues had registered their protest against him by spoiling their ballot papers rather than putting themselves forward as alternative candidates. Ultimately, as my research shows, a contested leadership election is the sign of a healthy partnership, a sign that people care enough about their firm to play an active role in its governance, and not just focus on their book of business. In this episode, I'm exploring leadership elections with Michael Ensser of Egon Zehnder. At the time of the interview, Michael was up for re-election as chair of the firm. Egon Zehnder consultants do a great job of coaching their clients in selecting senior leaders, but they insist on electing their own. So I want to find out why they choose election over selection and how they do it. Now, I've known Michael for a while, and he always chooses his words thoughtfully, but there are always powerful insights behind his meticulous language. So listen carefully with me. Michael, I am very curious. You are world specialists in the selection of leadership. Why do you actually elect your own leaders?
Laura, let me start with reminding us that we are a global partnership and therefore what I would call a partner democracy. There's a legal side, of course. We're a Swiss company. We're owned by partners who are the shareholders and by the governance of the jurisdiction of Switzerland in combination with our own governance.
But why? I mean, you don't just do it because of the rules. What purpose does it really serve? Put it this way, if you didn't have to do it, would you still do it?
Maybe I start with the question, what's the role of a chair good for? We do have a chair in our current governance, person or role that is separated fundamentally from the role of the CEO. Chair runs the board and is the ultimate leader of the firm. Chair represents the values. The chair, together with the board, sets the direction of the firm. The chair is going to safeguard the firm, looking at risk, looking at budget topics, and making sure together with the board, he or she selects the right CEO. That's an appointment. I think the more the person is not selected at the very top, but elected and has the buy-in of a, again, democratic majority of his shareholders, partners, colleagues, the more he or she, I think, finds a good basis and legitimation for setting direction and for safeguarding the firm and taking care of the values, being the guardian of the values.
You've explained why you elect the chair, and that makes sense. Partnerships often elect both their chair and their CEO. Indeed, I believe at least one of your competitors does that. Why don't you?
It's a good question, Laura. And we deliberately decided to reduce elections to the members of the board and to electing the chair, and then allowing the chair together with the board to select, and in that way appoint the CEO, through the CEO appoint the other levels of leaders, ExCo members, country managers, office leaders, practice leaders. There's a logic also coming with complementarity of the two characters and people involved, chair and CEO. The idea that they need to be able to work as trustful as possible, as effective as possible together, and that their complementarity allows them to dance together for the sake of the firm.
And some firms deliberately stagger the elections so that, in effect, if there is a concern about, let's say, the chair or the senior partner, the partners have an opportunity after 2 years to vote in someone who's directly opposed to them. And I've seen that happen sometimes as well. So it's like a constant renewing of the democratic process, which on the one hand is very empowering for the partnership, but must be incredibly problematic and challenging to manage. I find it very intriguing the way these elections can be used as ways of affirming a collective belief, but also, opportunities for playing out internal challenges.
I absolutely agree. Yeah.
But you also elect the chair of your partner meeting. Now, that's a role that's very particular and very important to Egon Zehnder. So can you explain what that person does and why it's important that they be elected?
Oh, yeah. That's a good question, and not easy to explain even to some of our partners at times. We come from the belief that our global and equal partnership, the partnership per se, is the ultimate decision-making body of our firm. To prepare decisions, to lead the firm, to set direction, safeguard the firm, you need to delegate that. And that's the board and the leadership of the chair. But this concept of the partnership as the ultimate decision-making body translates into the wish that we balance partnership and leadership, and therefore have a neutral instance, you could say, a neutral institution that is elected and called chair of the partner meeting, like a parliament president, making sure that over the year and over times, there is enough partner input brought to the room, brought up for discussion, brought to be considered by the leadership instead of just hoping leadership would take care of that alone. And is the place at the moment, the partner meeting, moderated and steered or stewarded by the chair of the partner meeting, where this balance comes in place, where it's not leadership telling partnership, but kind of working with partners, explaining to partners, seeking alignment on important directions or decisions to be made about directions and strategic choices.
I've found it fascinating. And I remember one partnership I was working with who at that stage only had a managing partner, no chair or senior partner. And the managing partner wanted to share the role with someone because it was so huge and so demanding. And working with the partnership, I was trying to calibrate how much would they accept in another role. And as a first step, what they would accept was an elected chair of the partner meeting. And that became the companion and the guide and the colleague that the managing partner could work with very closely. And I find that governance evolves in a series of baby steps, and that over time it just becomes accepted as, well, that's how we do it. It's the obvious and only way to do it.
Yeah.
But there's so many different permutations.
Let me mention the 1/3 institution that is elected by the partners. It's the chair of the partner candidate election or evaluation group. So who will make it into the partner room? Whom we invite as next shareholder at Egon Zehnder is organized by a group called Partner Candidate Evaluation Group. And we also elect the chair, and we confirm by election the members of that group. And it represents also a next level of balancing power. between partnership and leadership.
And in that sense, I love the way you've expressed this very deliberate and very calibrated iteration of balancing the power of the partnership and the leadership, and always the need to keep that in balance. And again, I always have the sense when I'm talking to Egon Zehnder that you do see yourself as quite a finely tuned ecosystem. You approach this in a much more conscious and mindful way than I think many other partnerships do.
Hopeful, Laura. And I think you know our firm quite well, and you know that our governance has indeed evolved over time, and that it was not just new traditions and new practices coming into the partnership, but also deliberately investigating where and when to improve and change our rules of engagement. What happened over 4 successions in history of our firm, starting with the founder, the person who gave our firm the name, Egon Zehnder, and going over 3 following chairman, who were appointed CEO before and without any contest, elected chair, let's say by default. And it was 2018 where 2 things came together in our firm. First, my predecessor, very well-respected British partner, Jill Ada, she challenged that procedure and said, is that the medicine we would want to describe or prescribe to our clients? Not have a choice, not have a discussion about the right way, not have a discussion about how we as partners want to balance power between partnership and leadership more, instead of just waiting for the appointment and assuming that appointed person will make it to chair anyhow. She was the one challenging that. She was the one being elected into office of chair. And in parallel, we changed our governance, saying we never want the chair to hold the role of a CEO in parallel, that these 2 roles be separated forever. At the same time, making sure one is elected, the other appointed, and that the appointment and the election go in a staggered way.
I know that sometimes people suggest that partnership or leadership elections in partnerships are just kind of ritualistic affirmations, and people talk about sort of Soviet styles of election. And I think what's intriguing about the story that you've described is that there is the formal rules that were always in place, and then there was the practice that ran in parallel to them. And it took one individual to question that, and by their intervention, also provoke a reaffirmation of the governance procedure. So there's always, with governance in these kinds of environments, the formal structures operating in parallel with the cultural practices.
Very much so.
And sometimes they evolve very naturally, sometimes they come into conflict, and there is a time of, let's have a governance review. So you had your first contested election back in 2018. And then when you came along, there was another contestation. So I think you had, 2 candidates when Jill was elected and 3 when you were elected. Am I right in remembering that?
Exactly. And we are going to look at contested elections now after the first term of 3 years of me in that role is coming to an end. In the case of Jill challenging the chair's candidate at that time, it was felt as more as a revolution than an evolution at that time. And it was bringing us the first female globally, by the way, in our industry, first female leader into the role of chair of one of the large global leadership advisory firms. And looking at her succession that came after Jill's term ended, for us, it was the most natural thing to call partners to bring forward suggestions, and through a robust process to make sure we are here really taking our own medicine. We found it the most natural thing to come up with more than 2 candidates and potential future chairs. It was 3 at the time. We finally found me being the one to be chosen. Again, after we're going into contested elections soon, it's again that we asked for other candidates willing to stand and seeking support by a group of partners, and will have a contested election leading to a reaffirmation or a new setup at our leadership. And that's, I think, representing the idea of our modern democratic way of electing and balancing partnership and leadership.
What you're doing is basically institutionalizing the contestation. When you have re-elections, it's very hard for a partner to put themselves forward against an incumbent because it's seen as some kind of threat. And therefore, the anxiety is, what are they going to think of me afterwards? What are the rest of the partnership going to think of me when I lose? But what you're doing is normalizing it and saying, hey, that's okay. This is all part of the dialogue we have. Ultimately, I think when there is energy within the partnership to have a voice, they'll find a way. You've made it a normal and natural way of going about it. So what advice would you give to someone who has won a contested election about how to deal with the people who challenge them?
Let me refer to the famous saying, the true character is not shown in defeat, but in victory. And I had the privilege to just visit and observe live the spectacle during the French Open, a historic match between the world number one and the world number two. So you can't say there was an obvious better player, but one had to win. And the first thing you heard, not candidates, but the competing players say after the match, when they hugged each other and honored the other, the winner said, I want to start with you, his opponent, and said it was a privilege to share the court with you. And I think it's a bit the same perspective I have for our contested elections. The people you're competing with are very respected partners. They are successful professionals. They have a standing and therefore a support to stand. And they don't compete against you about a totally different firm, but about nuances, about different priorities, about different ways of pacing or not pacing certain developments. So I think it's rather about not black and white, but the variety of gray tones we're competing about, based on the same purpose, based on the same values. And in that regard, I think it's honorable indeed to be challenged or be a challenger. And at the very end, it's reaffirming for the one who gets the majority to know there's a broad alignment, not only, but a clear democratic majority for that is where we want to go. That's the way we want to play in the midterm and even long-term future. And it gives you a good level of authority and legitimacy to carry things forward.
So you hinted at some of the details of how the actual election process occurs. Could you explain a little more? Do you also campaign? How does it work?
We are a firm of partners who dislike campaign, as we dislike politics, while knowing if you have a contested election, there are elements of politics around it. You can't neglect it, and it would be naive to think that's not happening. There is conversations, there is a bit of alignment building around. It's not that our partners are queuing and building a long line of volunteers. You have to find the one or the two, or maybe even the three only, who finally are willing to change their lives and change their jobs, give up client work and focus on running, leading a global firm, which comes with a lot of life-changing elements. In that regard, the chair of the partner meeting calls partners for suggestions. You have somebody presenting a candidate. That candidate would then go and answer questionnaires, record videos in which important and reached in questions of the partners are answered. They would then go into webinars and engage with partners in an open dialogue about, Michael or Jill or John, what's your idea about? Do you prefer this? Do you think we should prioritize that? Based on that, you get over a period of 2 months in a very structured process, a quite good understanding of the personalities, the backgrounds, the nuances of the candidates, considerations and thoughts and plans and dreams. And then finally, it comes to the moment of a partner meeting where you have the candidates on stage, partially repeating or differentiating their messages again, standing there for a Q&A. The three of us would then leave the room and partners would discuss about what they have seen and heard, as long as they feel they need to discuss before we pause for a moment and come back to elections at the next morning of our partner meeting. That's the way we go in a structured and robust process in identifying the potential candidates and finally deciding for the winner.
As you were telling that story, I was thinking back to sort of 3 years ago in the partner meeting and what it must have felt like for you walking out of that room and knowing they were your partnership, your people were all talking about you behind your back, and then having to sleep overnight and wait for them to vote. I mean, did that feel really weird?
It's a humbling moment, Laura, let me put it this way. And it makes clear you are the one serving the partnership. And this is an honorable and at the same time a demanding task, but you are a leader in service of a brilliant bunch of people who are the most seeked out advisors for top of the house clients around the world. You have to be able to stand that. It comes with a good level of resilience at the same time by taking yourself, and I would say foremost yourself, not too serious. At the same time, when we ask for board candidates to leave the room after presentation and a short Q&A and then have a discussion, I told some of my candidates for board elections that had to wait outside the room for half an hour. Don't think it's all about you. We suddenly have a discussion about, should we have contested board member elections? And this was going for 28 minutes of 30 minutes of them waiting outside. Well, of course, they think, what do they have to talk about me? What didn't they know? Which takes them too long to come to a conclusion. It's a logical and natural element. They have to stand that piece of heat, I would say.
You still know each other. You still have really quite densely interwoven relationships with each other. And I find this intriguing that you basically, in effect, have to submit yourself to potential humiliation by people who you care passionately about. And then if the people who get rejected have to not feel humiliated. I mean, that's an incredibly sophisticated and mature approach. I've seen so many partnerships where the people who don't win just leave in a huff or leaves a really bitter taste, a real anxiety, or indeed incumbents when they're challenged feeling so betrayed and so angry that, after all the work I've done, why don't they appreciate me more? And I have the sense, the way you describe this, is a very thoughtful, very meticulous attempt to genuinely try and make the right decision as a collective. Am I being idealistic here?
No, I don't think you are. Look, if I look back to the last process, two of my competitors, the other one being in that contested election process, are very good colleagues of mine. And I think they overcame the fact that they were not winning the election very quickly, not only given their resilience, but given their good spirit, their good sportsman mindset, and at the same time, their very important roles they continued to hold or they started to take. One of my colleagues is and was a board colleague who plays the most important role in driving most important initiatives in our firm. And we are in full respect. And we started to be competing at that time. We said, what would happen if I am the one or you are the one? And we could look into each other's eye and say nothing other than, I hope you would accept my offer to support you and to move things forward in the right direction. That was the immediate consolation we had as board colleagues and our predecessors' leadership. And there was a current head of one of our most important regions coming in as the third competitor. And he was, and he still is, one of the most respected partners, playing one of the most important roles in our firm. So I think we, the three, have demonstrated you can do that in good spirits. And it comes with somebody being elected, but the others don't feel defeated. I don't think it's idealistic. It might represent the spirit of a partnership that feels a bit more than just being a corporation.
And really, sort of, as we start to draw this interview to a close, I'm curious, if you think back to where you started, what do you wish you'd known when you first became a leader? I mean, you took on your first major executive role 15 years ago when you became a managing partner for Germany and Switzerland, which are, two real powerhouses, the origins of Egon Zehnder, the heart of Egon Zehnder in many respects. So if you think about the person you were, what do you wish you'd known back then about leadership that you know now? In spite of being, of course, an expert in selecting leaders, what have you learnt about being a leader in that time?
That's a very good one. And you find out next morning after election, there is no longer any issue. There's no longer any problem in that firm that is not also kind of your problem. You cannot talk about it and accuse anyone other than accusing you and making sure it gets solved instead of just talked about. That's what learning, and you feel the weight on your shoulders quite quickly, and that humbles you even more. And then the other lessons are lessons you learn, and you have to kind of go through in person while we are telling it leaders all the time. Surround yourself with the right people. Find people you can trust and you can count on, because you need to delegate a lot. You can dream about where our firm could go and which direction it could take and what projects we could run to come to a better place. But you need people who follow your ideas with heart and mind, and not just because you entask them. Then there are difficult people decisions. And my learning, as well as my recommendation, is don't shy away from it. Don't make compromises too much. Don't think in hybrid solutions so much, but be consequent. And in that way, also follow your heart, consult with a number of people you really can trust, and then go and make uncomfortable and bold decisions quicker than waiting for too long.
And my last question to you is, bearing in mind quite a few of our listeners have recently moved into leadership roles, or more so thinking of moving into leadership roles within their organizations, what advice would you give to someone trying to decide whether to step up and put themselves forward as a potential leader in their organization?
You have to prove yourself. You have to ask yourself and find out, does it feel the right thing even in your body? If you visualize the situation, if you envision yourself in such a role, would it come with the right level of energy, or is it for other reasons that would not make you the most successful, the most resilient person? Then you need to be in there with your heart and with your mind. Your body needs to speak the language and needs to make you feel this is the right thing for you. You need to be willing to work on your self-transformation a lot. If you enter such a role, you're not having it and then it's fine. You start to unlearn so much and learn so much new that you need to be willing also to go into that area and accept a level of ambiguity and of insecurity, but not getting overwhelmed from that. And if that feels like it, it's the right thing. And you can breath it, and you think you want to give all the energy you have into a project, into a strategic dream you can fulfill in your role, do it. Otherwise, stay away.
Thank you very much, Michael. It's been wonderful talking to you.
I thank you, Laura. It's a privilege to be part of your podcast. Thank you.
Now, I'd be happy to talk about leadership elections for hours, and I've studied them for more than 30 years, but we do have to stop soon. A robust leadership election is the sign of an energized group of professionals who care enough about their firm to demand a say in how it's run. And since sophisticated political skills are essential if you want to lead professionals effectively, then a good way of testing out these political skills is to run for election. Because if you can't persuade your colleagues to vote for you, you're unlikely to be able to persuade them to do much else. So there were 3 things that stood out for me as a key message for professionals grappling with the challenges of leadership elections. The first is to pay attention to the formal governance structures, but to be alert to the spontaneous expression of professionals' animal spirits. Michael spoke about the dance of leadership and partnership, and as he was talking, I got the image of a stately pavan, a formal dance from the Renaissance era. A pavan has a tightly choreographed set of prescribed moves which the dancers have to conform to, but there's also space within these moves for spontaneous expressions and transgression. The dance between leadership and partnership is just like that. Professionals execute a set of moves prescribed by the firm's governance structures, but during the formal dance of governance, spontaneous expressions and transgressions arise naturally as professionals attempt to dance together. The second key learning is that governance is a question that is never settled. Michael spoke of how the governance of his firm had evolved in recent years through a combination of individual initiatives and formal reviews. And a healthy professional organisation needs thoughtful individuals within it to question, challenge, and propose alternatives. And the leadership needs to regularly review their governance structures in response to changing circumstances. So a while back, a client asked me to send him a generic governance template that he could use within his firm. And I explained that governance just doesn't work like that. In a privately held professional firm, the optimal governance structure reflects the unique characteristics of the organisation and will evolve as the firm evolves. And the third key learning is about this balance between individual and collective responsibility, about the individual responsibility that sits within collective leadership. Michael's reflections on the individual burden of leadership were powerful. When I talk to senior leaders about the intricate dynamics of collective leadership, I sometimes simplify things by just saying, if it's lonely at the top, you're not doing it right. I do this to encourage senior leaders to let go of the burden of heroic leadership and to recognise the power that lies in a well-functioning collective. Certainly, Michael spoke quite emphatically about his sense of the collective within his firm. But in his final comments, he also spoke about the responsibilities of senior leadership and how that burden is something that he feels and experiences very much alone. Now, it may surprise you to know that not everyone who stands for a leadership election actually wants to take on that burden of responsibility. In one firm I worked with, the partners rejected their chair's anointed successor because they felt he was too focused on making the firm more corporate. A popular colleague had campaigned on the promise to, quote, give the partnership back to the partners, and he was elected instead. But when he tried to give the partnership back to the partners, they realised they had no idea what to do with it, and the new chair had no idea either. Their profits fell, and the partners quickly deposed their new chair and replaced him with a more corporate style of leader. So when it comes to leadership elections, be careful what you wish for. So thanks for listening, and thank you again to Michael Ensser for joining me today. If you enjoyed this episode, check out other episodes in this series featuring senior leaders from a range of professional organisations, from Google and the NHS to Freshfields and Linklaters and the ICAEW. You can read much more about leading professionals on my website, lauraempson.com, and please remember to subscribe, rate and review Leading Professionals wherever you get your podcasts. Join me next time.